All right, everybody, we're live here with the one, the only Nick Ferguson of Homegrown Liberty. This is we've been talking about doing this for a bit, but the guy has been busy running around doing a bunch of consults for people all over the country, which is pretty darn cool. And so having Nick on with us today is great. So Nick Ferguson of Homegrown Liberty, let's start out. Why don't you tell us who you are and how you ended up on Living Free in Tennessee's Live today?
Yeah, I'm Nick Ferguson. I am very tired. I've been gone more days this month than I've been home.
Yikes.
Yeah, I'm a sustainable agriculture ecosystem engineering consultant. I travel all over the US, outside the US, helping people design, troubleshoot, fix, and begin their homesteading and ranching, farming operations. Yes, I do have a beard. Um, uh, and I help people anywhere from just little quarter acre urban lots to, I mean, even smaller than that, up to, I mean, multiple 1,000 acre big multinational corporation gigs, anywhere in between. A lot of them, most of them though, are kind of in the 20 to 100 acre, 5 to 100 acre homesteads, and those are the ones I like working with. Like
Well,
yours, Nicole.
like mine. Yeah,
Yeah.
3 point whatever acres that I have here. So everybody's really just interested in your beard in the comments, I'm noticing. He
Let me
so
move
Nick
the.
was beardless at one point, or beard short. He's got like this big fluffy beard now for those on the
Yeah.
audio podcast. So yeah. Anyway, okay, so let's go to this. So I brought you on today to talk about food forests because I think it was like 5 years ago that you came here for the first time. And it was a hot mess. Am I right?
Yes. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah. Yeah. So when Nick comes to your place and it's a hot mess, he doesn't tell you it's a hot mess. He just asks questions and says, you might want to do everything completely different than you're doing it right now, just maybe. But he says it in a way that you don't realize that you're going to spend the next 5 years implementing the thing.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
had some specific challenges here, and the biggest challenge I had is that I do workshops. And 5 years ago when Nick was here, I wanted to do workshops. And that was my first year I did workshops. When you came here, did you see this as a prime venue for workshops?
Not prime. No.
Why not?
Just space. Yeah, everything was going to be tight. It was going to take some creative thinking, some focused purpose to get there. And I think you've done very well.
Yes. So I had a square peg idea that had to fit in a round hole. And that the reason I brought Nick in is I needed some outside help because I knew what I wanted and where I thought things should go were not necessarily where they should go. Because when you are really closely attached to your property, it's sometimes hard to see the forest for the trees, so to speak.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I was seeing a lot of trees in my way. And so over the next 5 years, what we've done is mostly clean up, beat back the brush with ruminants, and as the property opened up, it became easier to see where to put event space versus the food forest, which brings us to today. So 5 years later, we finally know where to put the food forest, right?
That's right.
Is that where you would have put it on your first day here?
Um, Probably.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure. The first time I stepped foot on your property, um, I knew that was going to be the easiest location to develop as far as fruit trees go. And I always try and think about how are you going to um, how are you going to get out there and get eyes on it? Because if it's someplace way out in the middle of nowhere on the back corner of your property, you're just not going to get out there. You're not going to work with it, and you're not going to
Mhm.
have success. So, um, some properties I have to really kind of sit and think and process and design things out, and I do a lot of kind of mental 3D designing in my head, and just kind of swapping out design elements and trying different scenarios out in my head. Um, so some properties it takes me a while to come up with an elegant design. Others it just because of the limitations, it just kind of it's there
It's like
and it just
there or nowhere.
yeah, yeah. And I think with your property, it was a little bit of a middle of the road, but I could see just tying in fruit trees and bushes and a little bit of perennial food production and a little bit of annual food production all in that area that we're talking about.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's back up. We came here to talk about food forests. Let's start at the very beginning, which is a very good
Mhm,
place to start, right?
mhm.
What is a food forest and how is it different than a fruit orchard? Because when you first came here, I had fruit trees back in the goat pasture, all of which have been killed by goats now. And that's fine because I never went back there and they were disease ridden and didn't give me any fruit. You know why I didn't go back there, right?
Because it's too far away.
It's back there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what's the difference between a food forest and orchard? What is a food forest, and why in the world would I even want one on my property?
Okay, so um the main difference that I see functionally between a food forest and an orchard is a food forest is generally going to be a little bit more organic looking. It is going to be more of a um, oftentimes it's less rigid. It'll be a little bit more wild, and normally, just from a functional standpoint, it's a lot more hands off. It's a lot more lower maintenance. And because it's lower maintenance, because it's lower inputs, it oftentimes ends up being lower outputs, lower yield. Um, so, for someone that leads a very busy, active lifestyle, they can't afford the intensity of the inputs and the needs that a higher producing orchard will get you. Um, if they can't afford the time and the energy inputs, then stepping back more towards a food forest style can be helpful. And it's a spectrum. It's not like one thing or the other. There's kind of a spectrum there that we can go from the highest intensity orcharding style management to the lowest intensity food forest. We just set it and forget it and come back 20 years later and it's producing something. Um, and I think what's probably going to end up happening is you're going to be somewhere in the middle, but probably going to be closer towards the higher intensity, just because you have people to help, and you're out there quite a bit. You're fiddling with stuff quite a bit. So I think you're going to be somewhere in the middle, but probably a little bit more towards the higher yielding, just because we're not building a 20-acre food forest. We're
Mm-mm.
building like an eighth to a quarter of an acre. And so when we have more room to work with everything, um, it gets more spread out and lower maintenance. And when we're packing things in a little bit tighter, then we're going to be able to afford the time to take care of one peach tree or to take care of two blueberry bushes versus 20.
Mhm.
Um, so the main difference between the food forest and the orchard is the food forest is going to be lowest maintenance, and lowest yielding, but m- most likely the highest resiliency. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have highest maintenance, highest yielding, most often the least resilient without stewardship and human intervention and work.
Yeah, and brass tacks here, guys. We're talking about taking a hunk of my land that is in the front of my house and reshaping the earth a little bit, but not much because the earth is what it is here. And putting in fruit trees, fodder trees, pretty trees if I want a pretty tree, bushes, shrubs, vines, like all of these different things, mostly from an edible or herbal plant standpoint. And setting that up in a way that they feed each other so I don't have to be out there every day like I am in my kitchen garden, which
Right.
is, if I had to do that in 5 different places in my property every day, the podcast won't get out, the coffee won't get roasted. So I don't have that
Right.
kind of time. And the whole time we've been setting up this property, I'm thinking about, I am going to get nothing but older from here. And it's my understanding that mobility doesn't generally get better as you get older. So it's good to keep active out in the yard, but I also want it to be something that's not torturous. So that's a food forest versus an orchard where you're going to have usually neatly organized rows that have
Rows.
accessibility for harvest. You're probably going to be manually maintaining them a lot unless you find an alternative way to do that. You're going to be trimming them all the time. And if a tornado comes through and rips out your entire peach orchard, it's gone, which is why we don't have one near me in Tennessee anymore. It's a tornado hit it.
Mm-hmm.
If a tornado hits my food forest, some things will be gone. The whole thing could be gone if it's a bad thing, but
Yeah.
we don't necessarily build for the tornado aspect.
Right.
But if Japanese beetles come through, some things will die in my food forest and some things won't because they won't be interested in everything in it.
Right.
So,
and it's
okay,
it's a lot easier to incorporate animals into a food forest style management plan than the more higher intensity orcharding style.
Yeah. And why would I want animals in my food forest, Nick?
Oh, because they do jobs for you and they're happy to do it, and then that's less work that you have to do. And just, I mean, I love it when I can allow animals to do what they want to do, and it takes hours of my labor off of my schedule.
Yes. That's
Always a win.
Absolutely true. I love when the sheep eat the grass and we don't have to mow the grass.
Mm-hmm.
So we haven't quite struck that balance here, but we're working on it. And that means the sheep are going through the food forest at some point. Probably. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how did the whole concept of food forest even come to be?
Oh, man.
I'm hitting you with the hard questions today.
Right. So this is kind of an old practice that's gone on for a long time. Jeff Lawton and Bill Mollison have both, I believe, filmed some video of walking through old what kind of originally started as, what I believe started as, just cultivating what was already there, and then when things that were not so advantageous died out, they were replaced with something more productive and more useful. And that kept going on for generations. I think, was it in Tunisia? Man, I can't remember exactly where it was. But there's this, they believe, I think it's supposed to be about 2,000-year-old food forest. And, it's just nobody, I don't think, anyone can say that this certain people's or this certain person invented the idea. It's just kind of a little bit more of a synergistic approach to living with nature and functioning in a natural ecosystem versus imposing your straight lines and and pruning everything for optimal production. So yeah, I think it just kind of organically developed over time, um, just as a natural expression of wanting to get a little bit more productivity out of a certain area than nature would have otherwise just dropped in people's laps.
Mhm. That makes sense. I know here, when I first moved here, I put my garden in, and there was this really annoying invasive weed in this one place.
Hmm.
And so my response was to whack, scorched earth, whack everything down, weed cloth, raised bed on top of that area where that really annoying weed was, and it started growing out the sides from under the that raised bed. And and then I just trim it to the ground. I'm like, eventually this thing's gonna run out of energy and it won't keep coming back. And counter to that theory, it kept coming back. And then I started learning about wild edible plants, and it was an elderberry. And you're laughing because elderberries are fairly stubborn once established.
Yeah.
But when I
And
realized it
wonderful.
was and wonderful, and when I realized it was an elderberry, I ended up with this raised bed that was surrounded by elderberries. So it was a shady raised bed where I could raise lettuce. And then eventually we just pulled the bed out, and now it's back to an elderberry patch. But once I realized what elderberry was, what mulberry looked like, and some of these other things that just grow here, I started realizing what I can do rather than decide where the elderberry goes on my property is just let it be there.
Yeah.
And that's where it wants to be. That's how I got stinging nettle on my property, although I believe it got killed by some earthworks recently, but I'm sure it'll be back. It's like, oh, well, that's where the stinging nettle wants to grow. And so there's always, for me, that struggle of I want a food forest. I want
Mhm.
specific kinds of fruit trees. I don't eat a lot of fruit, but I eat some fruit in season, and I can feed it to animals here. I definitely
Mhm.
want more fodder trees. I'm more of a berry shrubby person than a fruity tree stone fruit person. And like balancing that with what's already here has been like why I was struggling with even how to go. So like this
Mhm.
idea of having more of a methodology, that's the word, not I'm like mythology, no, that's not right, a methodology to do this is great. So when we get into food forests, like how do you start planning one? So we've decided where it's going to go here. We've fitted into sort of the big picture of Nicole's going to get old someday and doesn't go back there but goes over there. So now what? What do you do when you start on a food forest?
Yeah. So it's the same kind of assessment that we. Thank you. Um, that we look at any kind of a design. We start with water, and we look at access and structures. We look at solar aspect. We have to pay special attention to the specific needs of the types of plants that we're talking about. So it just kind of breaks down. So we start with water, because water is life. If we don't have the water, the plants aren't going to live. And we think about access. So not only do we need to think about access for today, but like you alluded to earlier, is we need to think about access um, in time. So we need to be thinking about access 10 years, 20 years down the road. We need to think about access from the perspective of, is there a chance that I might be incapacitated at one day, um, and I might need to get through there with, a wheelchair or one of those little electric buggy things, or even just a cane. Um, and think about how can I set this up and design it from the get go so that if one day I'm in the position where I need some assistance, or I need to get through there in a wheelchair. How can I do this? So, thinking about, setting up your garden beds. Well, if you're designing it from the get-go to require bending over, and you're already having a little bit of a hard time bending over, maybe we should be thinking about setting up our beds as raised beds, so there's no need to be bending over. Um, we should also think about our fruit trees from the perspective of, if I'm designing this, and today getting up on a ladder is a little bit difficult, in 10 years, is that going to get easier? So if the design from the get-go is stretching our limits right now, then we're building a kind of a deficient, a broken system from the get-go. So we need to think about that stuff in the future. So we'll look at solar aspect and water, getting irrigation to it for establishment. I don't care where you are, putting in some hugel beds and never designing in any ability to get water to your trees or bushes or whatever you have grown out there, that's kind of foolhardy in my opinion, especially if you're investing thousands of dollars into this. So
I feel
want
like
to
you've
think of,
learned that lesson the hard way once.
nope, I've never actually had to learn that lesson.
Nope.
I could just observe it,
Mm-hmm.
um, and see what other people were suggesting, and see the future ramifications, and just avoid that altogether. So thankfully I have not had to learn that lesson.
The hard way.
Right, the hard way. So we'll think about water, we'll think about access, we'll think about where the structures are and how those structures are going to affect wind patterns and solar gain. You mentioned elderberry. Elderberry likes wet feet, and they like to be exposed to south or west facing solar exposure. You very rarely see elderberry growing in a ditch, on a north facing slope.
That's where pawpaws go.
Yeah, pawpaws like the shadier, cooler, moister slopes. You almost I've never seen one growing in the wild in a sunny west facing or southwest facing slope.
I've killed 5 or 6 on my sunny south facing slope.
Yeah, yeah, and they'll do okay as long as they have some western shade and they have sufficient irrigation, and you don't ever let that soil dry out.
Ever.
And they'll do, yeah,
Not
and they'll
one
do
time.
wonderful. Yeah, that
Yeah.
one time. They'll
Not
do
one time.
wonderful. But they have to stay consistently moist. So we're gonna think about things like that. But you just systematically go through those steps, and we think about the eventual height of these fruit trees, and we want to make sure that we're not putting something that's going to grow tall in front of something that's going to stay short, and that the short thing needs full sun. Well, if we put it in front of something, if we put the tall thing just down the slope right in front of the thing that needs the full sun, and we block all that sun from it, well, we're designing kind of a broken system from the get-go. So we have to think about the height, and then we're going to look at and look at the total canopy of what things we're going to be planting, and just kind of go step by step through these. They're kind of little details, but if you skip over those little details, or you just don't know about them, and you just kind of slap things out there without understanding what those details are and the consequences of not attending to those details, then they start stacking up, and they can start becoming more and more of a big deal as time goes on. So
I find it interesting having recently taken a swale class that your design starts in the same place, almost as if it was part of a design science with a mysterious name, where you talk about water and then access.
Hmm.
And, the thing about access is it's not just how do I access the food forest, but if I am running a 10-foot wide chicken tractor between plants, I cannot have plants planted 6 feet apart. It won't fit through there. 2 6-foot apart trees, not gonna happen. So you really
Yep.
have to think about sheep are gonna go through here, or the chicken tractor is gonna go through here. How wide is it?
Right.
And and there's a benefit to doing that because they graze and they poop, and then the poop is fertilization, and that's
Hmm.
good for everything. So what tell us more about that design science that we're poking around the edges at.
Oh, the dreaded P word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
regenerative agriculture, that one.
Right. So yeah, I like taking the good from whatever design science I have available to me, whether that is um keyline design, Regrarian style doing things, Joel
What's
Salatin
keyline
style.
design for people who've never heard of it?
Keyline design is kind of a take on earthworks and water moving and pasture management that was developed by P.A. Yeomans in Australia. Um, Permaculture was also developed in Australia. Um, it's just kind of a different flavor, and it has a different fan club, and they can get really dogmatic, just like the whole permaculture crowd can. Um, I don't really ascribe to any of them. Um, I like I said, I like to take the best of each one of them, utilize what I can, utilize what makes sense, and spit out the bones. Um, so yeah, I like to uh, take it from a much more holistic approach and a less dogmatic approach, and say, you know, what works best here, what works best in this context, and let's use appropriate technology for the reality on the ground, the limitations of both the environment and the humans and the animals and all of the facets that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Okay. So with that in mind, when you've done the design here,
Hmm.
like how have you come so I've been working with you on figuring out what plants to source, right? And how
Yep.
many. How did you come up with that?
Again, it's thinking about the the spacing. The more we cram things into a tight space, the less productive they're going to be. So, if we're looking at, let's say, a pear tree, for instance, and it's going to have an eventual canopy width of 8 foot, and we have a 16-foot space. Well, we can't fit more than two pear trees in this 16-foot wide space. But if we're looking at needing some access in between those pear trees, well, we have to think about our equipment or our access needs. So, I mean, if it's
Mhm.
just foot traffic, I'd like to have at least 4 feet, a hallway width between the branches. So we have to take the canopy width of all
Mhm.
of the things that we're looking at, and then we have to take the width of all of our access. So, I'm generally not really comfortable going with anything less than about 4 foot width in between rows of plantings of any kind,
Mhm.
because I need to get through there. And then it just gets larger from there, depending on what kind of equipment that we're dealing with. So the kind of the nitty gritty answer is you just look at the the total square footage, and then you break it down by the canopy spacing,
Mhm.
and then you just ask the question of yourself or the client, what do you want? Do you want to make 100 gallons of perry every year? All right, we're planting a whole bunch of pear trees. And then you just crunch the numbers and find out what you can fit in the space, how intensive you want to get with it, and you go from there. If it's kind of more of a smorgasbord, then we just start spacing things out, and kind of you just eyeball or rule of thumb, just kind of space things out to the best of your ability. And it also comes down to budgetary allowances. Do we have the financial flexibility to buy everything outright, or are we going to be buying 2 blueberry bushes with the eventual goal of having about 20, and we're just going to propagate some more
Mhm.
because that's easy to do. So I don't know if that answered your question. How
I
do
think
you?
so. I
Okay.
think so. I think the next thing that becomes the obvious thing to talk about are zones. So what
Okay.
zone does it make sense to put your food forest in? But some people here may not know what I mean by zones. I know somebody had a question about that early on, which is just how do you plan it and how do the zones relate to that? So can you kind
Right.
of touch on what the zones are, and then when you're planning your food forest, what does that mean?
Right. Right. So, um, this kind of goes back to that spectrum of where are you in between, the lowest maintenance food forest, kind of zone 5, almost zone 4, and then the highest maintenance, highest intensity um place where you're going to be out there weekly. um you might have this food forest in its early years be nearly a zone 1 enterprise, because you're using that space, as these trees are small, to grow a lot of annual crops, to make that space productive and efficient and useful. So again, those zones might change in time. In your situation, there's going to be a lot of synergy between the trees and the bushes and kind of that understory. There might be some lemon balm mixed in there. There might be um, different kinds of herbs, and there might be comfrey in there. There might be some fodder trees mixed in this. So in your situation, we're looking at much more of a zone 2/3. um, and one of the things that I don't I might be getting kind of on a rabbit trail, a tangent here, but the zone thing in the whole permaculture world, a lot of people like to think that um, when we're designing this out, we're going to slap a label of the the zone. If it's grazing, if it's a grazing area, it's a zone 3. That's just what it is, and that's not
Mhm.
how it works. um, the zones are not decided on by you. The zones are decided by the the usage. How much time are you spending out there? How often are you going out there? Right outside of your front or your back door, whichever door you're using the most, that's going to be zone 1. And
That's
if
Taj
you're
Mahal here, by the way, guys. That's
right,
my zone
right,
1.
that's
Hillside
your zone.
Garden is zone 1.3.
Yeah, yeah. If you're going out there and you're stepping foot on this every day, and you can, pretty much, if you can take a yardstick and reach out and touch something as you're going about your daily activities, everything that you can touch with that yardstick, I call zone 1.
So
So,
you end up with an amoeba shape.
right, right. Well, it
Mhm.
can be a really weird shape. You can have a regular kraken shape if you design things poorly. And
Mhm.
you can have a very inefficient very exhausting, very energy intensive system if you put your chickens, like I did.
Way down at the bottom of the hill?
Well, no, they were
That's where
about
mine are.
200 250 yards from my house. Now that was just really due to a constraint, in that was the only place I could, that was the closest place I could put them. Um, but that's not ideal in most situations. And so everything for 250, 200 steps, everything was zone one. And I had this long, snaking, weird zone one with a little
Mhm.
cluster out at the end. And that's just very inefficient. It's very exhausting. And if you're younger, you can do that. But what we want to do is we want to try and put those trees that are going to be the least often touched or the least often needed furthest away. And then sometimes what we can do is we can design a donut. So you have kind of a donut of zone one where you get to make this loop around where you
Where you go.
have, yeah, you have certain things that you have to touch along this whole loop, and zone two might be in the center of that.
Mhm.
A good example is, everything that we use in our kitchen, everything that can turn into dirt goes into the bucket, and the scrap bucket goes with us, and a clean bucket goes with us, and we take both of those directly out to the garden. And everything that's good that we're going to eat goes into the clean bucket, and we put a towel over top of that. And everything that's bad from that garden that can turn into dirt goes in the scrap bucket, and that gets carried past some fodder trees that we take a couple snips off of. We go out to the rabbits, we give the rabbits some fresh fodder, and then we proceed on to the chickens, and we dump all that stuff that can turn into dirt into the chicken feeding tub. The chickens eat what they want. The rest of it gets dumped out the next day in their bedding. They scratch through it and they dry it out, and it kind of mummifies until later that year. We put it in a composter, and we collect the eggs, and we make this circuit, this loop right back to the house, and we've made the least number of steps that we need to make to attend to all those chores, instead of going out to the garden, bringing all the stuff back to the house, going out to the chickens, gathering the eggs, giving them the scraps, coming back, or even worse, then going back out to the compost pile, and then coming back, and then going back. And
Yeah.
when you
No, how that would go here is getting the eggs, coming back. Oops, I forgot the bucket. Go get the bucket. Give the scraps to the chickens. That's kind of
right,
a typical day here
right,
when
and
we're
and so
not
one
organized in the morning.
right, and so one of those things is, I've having traveled so much, I was kind of forced into making things as simple and easy and kind of childproof as possible. And so, at the chicken barn, what do we have? We have some water right there. We have a sprayer on a garden hose, and we have a little bottle of dish detergent, and we have a scrubber on a rope. So it's just hanging there, and you can't lose it because it's on a rope, right?
That's why it's on the
And
rope.
so that's right, it's on a rope. And so you dump the food, and instead of bringing back this nasty bucket that stinks, or that's going to be a chore for somebody else, or it's going to get forgotten and it's going to get all caked on and nasty and greasy and grimy and bleh. Instead, it's right there. The stuff just got dumped out. You hose it out just to rinse out whatever's left. You toss a little bit of soap in it. You grab the scrubber and you just swipe around a little bit, and it's done. And then you get to come back with maybe it's not spotless, but it's not going to stink. It's not going to be nasty. You're going to have a relatively clean bucket. And it's right there. It's really easy, and it's hard to walk past it and not see that scrubber. So just thinking about these things um, beforehand can really set yourself up for success and save you a lot of time and a lot of energy. And thinking about how we lay these needs out, we can design those zones to make it easy for not only ourselves, but I don't know about you, but I travel sometimes. I like to go camping. And
Yes.
if I'm gone for 2-3 weeks on a camping trip, trying to shoot sharp, pointy sticks into bears and deer, um, I have animals back at home that need to be taken care of. And if I design a complex system that's difficult, complicated, and and you know just unnecessary in its complexity, then it's going to be, if I can convince someone to take care of my animals after they have one go at it, if it's complicated and difficult, they're going to kind of get tired of it and not want to do anything with it again.
Yeah.
But if it's really simple and it's just easy, then we can set ourselves up for success in that. If someone's taking care of your chickens and you've got a 35-gallon brute uh, trash can with some elbows in the bottom of it, some PVC elbows, and you fill it up with laying pellets, whether that's the way that you manage your chickens or ducks or whatever normally, you could fill that with a couple 100 pounds of feed. And how
Yep.
long is that
And
going to last them?
depends on how many rats you have.
Right. um
This is the year of the rat here.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got a
I had a
solution
roof.
for
You
you
don't know
on
this. I had
that.
a roof rat. So my wall of tomatoes had caterpillar bites out of it,
Yep.
and I kept not finding caterpillars. And I looked up one night, and there's a rat comes hopping out of my gutter and starts chewing on a tomato. So it was actually rat bites. That
Nice.
rat has since departed this earth.
Nice.
But so now I don't have a roof rat, but I had a roof rat apparently.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But yes, it would last a long time if you don't have a rat problem.
right. Yeah. And so, if we design these zones out intelligently, and we just, like Bill Mollison said, we spend some time with protracted thought, then we won't spend as much time with protracted effort.
Yes.
So if we think about this stuff ahead of time, then not only is it going to be easier on us, but our lives are going to be a lot freer in that we won't be as tied down and beholden to the complicated and difficult life that we designed. So our goal with your design is to make it as simple as we possibly can, so that it's easy for you to just kind of take a stroll through your food forest in the mornings, get your eyes on things, sip a little coffee, have an
Mhm.
enjoyable little walk, and then, possibly harvest a little bit while you're walking through, or just enjoy it. And then, getting your eyes on it will help you see things that need to be addressed in the future, and just help you stay on top of things, and uh, and and it won't get out of hand. So um always always, for the people that are listening, uh try and design things in such a way that they're going to be enjoyable to exist with. If you can make it enjoyable to just take a stroll through your little food forest or your orchard, um then it becomes more of a pleasure than a chore.
Yeah. Otherwise, it gets out of hand.
Right.
Back to spacing. You were talking about spacing trees and the canopy. This
Hmm.
person's asking, who is it? Homemade Self Reliance is asking, is root system space a concern as well as the canopy spacing?
Yes. So we need to be thinking about if we're pruning things back, let's say fodder trees, if we prune them back tremendously, so for instance, if we're coppicing every winter, then those trees will shed roots, but they're going to have roots that spread a whole lot further than their canopy does. So,
Mm-hmm.
we need to be mindful of, for instance, if we're planting hybrid willow, we don't need
Mm-hmm.
to be planting these hybrid willow, you know, 15, 20 feet away from a septic leach field. Not the best idea, because they have very vigorous roots and they'll just clog all of the holes. And
And
then,
that's not what you want in your septic leach field, guys, in case you don't know that.
yeah, you'll have a smelly problem.
You will have a backup problem, is what you will have.
Hmm. Yeah,
No good.
right.
Okay, so no hybrid willows in my septic drain field area. Got it.
Exactly.
Those go down by the creek anyway. They like it down there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that was, thank you for pointing that out. That was another one of those things that, sometimes your site will have special design considerations that will make it just will kind of force you into a certain situation where one thing has to go here.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to roll with it. That, like, for instance, with me, with where I had to put my chickens, I just had to roll with it.
Yeah.
So if that's the kind of situation that you're dealing with, then maybe that path out to where your livestock are, maybe you line the path in some of those fodder trees so
Yeah.
that as you're walking, you can be snipping some stuff to harvest as you go. So, that's, I'm sure we're going to run into a couple of those issues. I think one of the things is that one of the best places to put your fodder trees is going to be towards the bottom of the hill.
Probably.
So, not going to be ideal, but
Mm-hmm.
it's, when it comes to management of those fodder trees and coppicing, that kind of stuff, longer term, that's going to be a whole lot easier on a terrace, where you have a little bit flatter ground, and you'll be able to move a cart in and out of there a whole lot easier to harvest larger amounts of leafy matter. So,
Mm-hmm.
so
Although
yeah,
I'll probably pollard them down there.
right.
Right. Right. My property's really weird and steep, so that's the other thing about my
But
property.
beautiful.
But beautiful. I live in a teacup. It's like a very steep teacup.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have great views, but it that's why I went more for the pollarding approach on those than the coppicing, just
Mm-hmm.
because I think I might actually keep up with it. We'll
Right.
find out next year. Yeah. Margot says willow and ficus roots chase water. I'll never plant either one after a $6,000 sewer line. But yeah, see things we
Yep.
need to know about.
Yep. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So when we go, so an orchard tends to be monoculture, one kind of plant, right? Most of the
Correct.
time. You might have some companion plants there, but what about a food forest and its layers? Because once you figure out where
Mm.
it goes and the spacing, and like I've already mentioned the kinds of fruits I want in there and that sort of thing, what about the layers, and what do you need to think about as far as the kinds of plants you might want to put in a food forest?
Right. So that's one of the cool and unique things about the whole food forest idea, is that you'll have multiple layers that you can kind of stack and take advantage of, the different layers that are available. Just to kind of give an illustration, it's the difference between just a 2,000 acre cornfield where there's one layer, and you plant some GMO corn so that you can spray atrazine and kill everything else but the corn. And so you have just corn growing there, and it's all one layer, and there's just not very much diversity,
Mhm.
and the ecosystem is not going to be very healthy. It's not going to be robust. um it's Especially if we're trying to design a robust, healthy, lower maintenance lifestyle and ecosystem into our property, then um going more with the food forestry approach, while I like it does have its drawbacks. um we can take advantage of those different layers. And so that just nothing but grass hayfield that you see just cows grazing on, um if we start to go with kind of a rotational multi-species grazing system, and we add trees, or we add some swales where we have trees and understory trees and shrubs and vines, then a lot of times we can, by stacking those systems, it's not as if taking away the grass is going to take away our ability to get food off of that land. So, without getting too complicated, if we can run 100 cows on that property, and um, and then we add those other design elements, and we have to go down to, I don't know, 60 cows. Well, if you're just thinking about it from the beef production, yeah, you lost production. But if you go multi-species with your thinking and your management, um, well, you might be able to not only make up the difference in the beef that you would have otherwise been able to produce if it was just grass,
Mhm.
but you might be able to add some pigs and sheep and goats and chickens and turkeys and some ducks, and have a much more healthy and diverse system in its totality, and actually get more pounds of food out of that same acreage than if it was just grass. And
Mhm.
so the same kind of thing applies with an orchard versus a food forest. So if we're stacking multiple different functions in there, then we can have a much more diverse yield. And sometimes that diversity of yield is a net positive versus just having, you know, 20 bushels of peaches. Because what are you going to do with 20 bushels of peaches?
Can them, of course.
Right.
I wouldn't can that many. 20. Have you ever, you know how many jars that would be?
That's a lot.
It's a
That's a lot of
lot.
jars.
Yeah, you'd have to sell some of that or compost it or feed it to your pigs. But yeah, that makes sense. And I know
Right.
like there are 7 layers of the forest though, right? Where
Yep.
you have trees and
So,
shrubs.
yep. So you have your overstory, you have your understory trees, you have vines, you have your herbaceous layer, you have shrubs. I skipped over shrubs to get the herbaceous layer. And then you've got your rhizome layer, and I'm forgetting one. Rhizomes, herbaceous, shrubs. Did I say vines?
You said vines.
Um, Understory, overstory. That's only 6.
Roots.
Yeah, the rhizome layer. Anyways, yeah. So we have, we
Is
might have
grass
an over.
different than herbaceous? Is that the difference?
I can't remember.
Yeah, that's me. I'm gonna pull it up because now it's
Now
not.
it's gonna
It
bother
is.
you.
Yeah, now it bothers me. Canopy, subcanopy, shrub, herbaceous, ground cover. That's what it is.
Ground
So
cover
for
there.
me,
That's what it was.
herbaceous and ground cover. This is why I always do that too, Nick.
Yep.
They're the same thing in my head.
Yeah. Yeah,
Because you know what I use for ground cover? Herbs
yeah,
often. But
yeah,
yeah, interesting. Yeah.
yep, yep.
So, and it says here some overlap exists between. Yep, there you go. And then
And I'm
Billy
sure
Bond
after
likes to
having.
add an eighth layer of fungal,
Oh yeah, yeah,
which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah,
no, I
and
can see that.
necessary.
Hmm.
But the whole point of these layers, guys, is that they work together. And if you don't have something in every spot, what happens?
Ah, yeah. There's the important question. If
Yes.
you don't if you don't pick, if you don't choose what's going to happen there, nature will choose for you,
Yes.
and nature's choice might make you sad.
Yes.
So if you don't want to be sad or potentially sad, then you should make the decision and pick what's going to go there, or it might be something that well, it might be something that makes you sad for a while until you realize that it makes berries that help protect you from the flurona.
Yeah, the flurona, which is totally what happened to me. Okay, next question. How do you start with a food forest when you have a small plot and a mature tree that's already established? That's from Tori.
Hmm. So you start with the limitations that you're dealt. So if you have a giant canopied out tree, then you're going to have to think about what can grow in its total shade or in its drip line and start working from that drip line out. So
Mhm.
sometimes, if this is something like a live oak, that's just, you're not going to get, it's a walnut tree.
Even better. Oh,
So,
even easier.
right. So we have the added jugalone issue with walnuts and pecans.
Yes, we have.
Um, so you're going to need to be thinking about what things are sensitive to jugalones. So a lot of um, the tomatoes and potatoes, those are going to be quite sensitive to jugalones. So we don't need to be thinking about growing things like that under there because they're probably just going to die. Um, so basically, you're gonna start with that
Circle.
that drip line from that
Hmm.
tree, and you start looking at what things can I plug in to the space around it. And most trees grow kind of circular, so you're gonna, if you have circles next to each other, there's going to be triangular spaces or diamond shaped spaces in between them, and they'll often grow to fit those that sunlight space, unless
Hmm.
you space them out according to kind of their maximum growth, and then you'll have these irregular shapes in between where you do have some sunlight. So um so if you have that mature tree already, then it's just going to be there most likely past when you're going to be gone. So we just have to deal with the reality that there's just going to be a bunch of shade there. So we can look at some things that might grow in that shade that might just provide us some enjoyment, or might provide us some income opportunity. So if it's a walnut tree and it's super shady, and let's say it's moist, or you can get irrigation there and keep it moist with maybe a couple little mist heads, um, then maybe underneath that walnut tree, we're propagating a whole bunch of mushrooms. We've got some mushroom logs stacked, and we're going to keep them cool and moist. And then on the outskirts of that, um, you might plug in some berry bushes, and then outside of that, you might put in, depending on your region, you might put a cherry tree, or a plum, or something else that's going to handle the juglone. Mulberry, I think most stone fruits. Um, oh, there was a couple more. Um, fell out of my head. Um,
I'll be
just
back
look up.
tonight
Yeah,
at 4. I'm going to get a text. It's going to list 2 more trees.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So just Google search juglone tolerant fruits or juglone tolerant plants, and I'm sure you'll get a whole list of things. And so those would be kind of my buffer plants, and then on the outside of those is where you're going to put other things, and you
Like
just kind of,
tomatoes.
yeah. You just kind of spread it out from there, and just it's kind of color by number. Just find out what you want, what you need, and be mindful of what these trees are going to do long term, because we don't want to end up with something that's going to end up killing its neighbor, unless the goal um, is eventually to have just a whole bunch of pecan trees. If we
Mm-hmm.
plant them, in accordance with their eventual canopy height, canopy width, so that they're going to be, tight enough that we'll get maximum production out of them, because that's our eventual goal. Where we might have 20 years between the canopy height and width being maxed out, and when we plant them. So we might be able to plant things in a time sequence, as well as in a structure sequence. So also think about the time. You might be able to grow beds of strawberries for several years,
Mm-hmm.
whereas that same space is going to be completely shaded out. So as you're kind of building out, think about the time sequence, and what can I do to take advantage of that niche in time, as well as that niche in space.
Yep. And how does the formula change if it's maple and pine trees instead of a walnut tree for that
It's
same
kind of
scenario?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing. A lot of people are really freaked out about pine trees making the soil acid. Um, don't worry so much about that. Um, a lot of people try and chase soil pH, and I think that's just kind of silly. Don't worry about that. The soil's going to do what the soil's going to do. Um, if you're dealing with a mature pine tree, um, as opposed to a maple tree, that mature pine tree is a pioneer species. Um, ooh, that's a good pun. A pioneer species.
Pioneer.
Um, Pioneer. Um, that's a free
Blueberries
gift,
like
guys.
that acid, says Jed.
Yep. So just be mindful of the longevity of the trees that you're dealing with. So if you're building stuff around a mature pine tree that is already starting to shed limbs, or you're seeing a little tiny bit of dieback, then you need to know that that pine tree might only have about 5 years left
Yeah.
to live. And if you're going in and planting $2,000 worth of fruit trees and bushes all around it, well, you might have a bad day when that tree needs to come down and it smashes a whole bunch of stuff
Yeah.
on the way down.
That's
So
never happened here. Never. It'll happen again. Okay, I'm gonna interrupt this because we're getting short on time,
yep.
and uh, I do want to say Nick Ferguson is coming to the Holler Guys in Lancaster, Tennessee, October 28th and 29th, and we're installing a food forest here. And so I thought it'd be good to start getting him on to talk about it. Also, so I can work on, we're working out some of the finals on the agenda. But if you are interested in taking that class, it's 2 days. We actually come in on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday's class, and then leave Sunday. So it's really spanning 4 days. I feed you. It's $400 US dollars to come. Or if you decide to pay me in Bitcoin, it's only $360. And if you've never paid with Bitcoin before, I will walk you through it. So just putting that out there. If you'd
Do
like to
it.
grab the class, that's over at livingfreeintennessee.com. On the homepage, on the right is a button where you can just sign up for it, unless you're on a mobile phone, in which you'll have 3 posts and then it's under. And there are some other events there as well. I wanted to bring that to y'all's attention. We're going to take a few more questions here, though, because there's all the questions are now starting to come. So, should there be blueberries around the drip line of the pine?
That's a perfectly acceptable place to put them.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Jed Froggy wants to know how do you transition a grove of other stand of existing trees towards a food forest? So this is a case where you move in, there's already trees there. They're maybe not exactly the trees you want. So how do you do that?
So I would be, taking this back to the longevity of the tree and the health of the trees that you're looking at. I would be looking at the just kind of best forestry practices. Look at what trees are the most diseased or the worst formed. If you have a tree that goes up 6 feet and then there's a crotch, that's a really narrow crotch, and it's kind of janky looking, and there's kind of a bulge on one side, and then 10 feet to its side is a tree that's perfectly formed, and there's no blemishes in the trunk, and there's a nice big wide root flare to it, and it looks great. You might want to consider taking down the tree that's poorly formed to open up the canopy. A lot of times people get, and this is where I clash with the permy crowd. A lot of those people tend towards the tree hugging flavor and like to say things like, but man, like, these trees have been here longer than you have, bro, and we just need to respect their space. And I say, well, those trees aren't doing anything to feed me or my family. And so we're going to help nature along, and we're going to help these pioneer species do what they're designed to do and success out to let the white oaks grow, to let some other fruit-bearing things grow, to let some other trees grow that we can cycle more nutrients more rapidly through the whole landscape. So don't be afraid of cutting trees down. Obviously, don't just go cutting everything down willy-nilly. Do it with forethought and do it with intentionality. But don't be so afraid to cut down a tree that you're going to sit on an overstory canopy of things like sweet gum and pine and all these other pioneer species, because
Cedar.
the generation before you took all of the really valuable hardwoods off of it and just let it grow up in scrub, and you're looking at it and seeing, oh, this is a beautiful, old growth forest. No, it's not. It's 60 years old, and it's just trash trees. Don't be afraid of stepping in and taking that mediocre forest and turning it into something beautiful and productive and healthy. Don't be afraid of taking out unhealthy trees and replacing them with something that's going to add more diversity and life and resiliency to your landscape.
Yeah, somebody asked me once, what do I do about my woodpecker problem? They're killing my trees. And I said, you have an unhealthy tree problem.
Right.
There are insects in your trees. That's why the woodpecker get the peck. They are not killing your trees. The bugs are killing your trees, and they're killing your trees because your trees are weak. Okay. What other nitrogen fixers besides black locust would you incorporate in zone 6?
I probably wouldn't incorporate black locust.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's not a fan.
I love black locust. I think it's a wonderful tree. It's a powerful tree. If you're asking, should I plant black locust? The answer is no, because you don't know what you're doing. You don't know the tree. You don't know what it's capable of. You don't know the ramifications of your actions, so you shouldn't do it. Same with honey locust.
Why, Nick?
Because honey locusts have thorns on thorns, and then if you cut them open, there's thorns inside.
Thorns inside?
Thorns.
Yeah.
And those thorns are like that long. And they have thorns on the thorns on the thorns.
First time Nick was at my house, he picks up this honey locust thorn that's like the size of his arm, says, Can I have this?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yes. Why? Because I want to show it to my next client about why they shouldn't plant this there, because this will pop a tractor tire. And I said, yeah, I know. Ask me how I know.
And black locust is another one of those that's a wonderful tree. It's fantastic, and people love, you know, these well-meaning permaculture enthusiasts will say black locust has amazing BTUs. Absolutely, it does.
Does.
It does.
So does Osage orange.
It yeah, they both do. The black locust sapwood does not have amazing BTU qualities. It's the heartwood that does. If you compare the sapwood of black locust to just the regular growth, it's mostly sapwood, um, of white mulberry, for instance, the black locust beats it out, but not by much. So, you know what we could grow? We could grow something that doesn't have inch and a half thorns that are literally designed kind of like caltrops on the branch. So when that branch sheds off of the tree, it's sitting there poking up and will put holes in even agricultural, tractor tires. Um, there goes six, seven, $800. Um, I mean, a lot of times you can just plug those or patch them, but that's expensive. Um, so, rather than planting something that has thorns and is going to make your life miserable, we could just replace it with something else. Just because someone who's really enthusiastic, who didn't really dive deep into the subject and said, it has great BTUs. Yeah, it has great BTUs. If you give it like 7 or 8 years to grow, and then you have to split the sucker. But if you're coppicing it, you might as well grow white mulberry and get slightly subpar BTUs out of the same stuff. But then you've got, 20 something percent protein leaf content in the leaves that everything can eat. Black locust will kill horses. So, you know, um, and that kind of goes back to the whole nitrogen fixer thing. I think it gets overblown. I think it gets way overblown. People glorify and deify nitrogen fixers. Yes, they fix nitrogen. If you really actually look at the numbers and crunch the numbers, pushing a flock of chickens through there once or twice a year will do way more for putting nitrogen on your property than a black locust ever will.
What about our favorite shorter plant for that?
Our favorite shorter plant?
Comfrey.
Oh, comfrey doesn't really fix much nitrogen. Comfrey loves to eat nitrogen.
And then you compost with the leaves.
Right.
Yes.
And then you get to use that nitrogen that the comfrey sucked up during the course of the year and reapply it elsewhere. So I mean, they're wonderful plants. Most plants will fix nitrogen to some extent. I don't think the nitrogen fixers are nearly as big of a deal as most people think they are. And this is coming from someone who, as a teenager, read, college level textbooks on soil science and plant physiology. I think they're great, but they are dangerous trees that can do a lot of harm. And so I would hate for someone to just get excited about nitrogen fixers and they don't know what a black locust can do or honey locust can do, and they bring them on their property. And then you have a situation where, you got the thornless the thornless honey locust, and it drops the seeds and the cattle eat the pods, and it's great sugar, wonderful carbs. But then out of the back end comes the regular thorny honey locust, and then you have a field full of tractor tire poppers.
Yeah, those just grow wild here. So, okay, we have to lightning round this, Nick, because it's about time to wrap up. So, can you just pick a bunch of stuff you want in a food forest and make it work?
Short answer, yes, you can. There is some companion planting that should not happen, um, and there is some that should.
All right.
But yeah, that's a complicated question.
It is a complicated question. What are some miniature trees that stay small, and are they worth planting, like fruit trees?
Yeah, so a lot of the dwarfing rootstocks will produce very quickly, so you'll get a quicker yield. So if you want to plant it and get fruit sooner, um, like in years, so instead of waiting 20 years for a standard size fruit tree to start yielding, a dwarf tree might start yielding the next year or 2 years later. Um, Depending on how old it is and how mature it is. So the more dwarfing it is, the quicker it will yield, but also it's kind of like a flare. The quicker it burns out.
All right, next lightning round. I can't keep squirrels from eating my vegetable garden. What say you, Nick?
Okay, so squirrels are tough, and I have to be careful that I don't. Let's not talk about squirrels, okay? Let's shift from squirrels to, I don't know, some other kind of agricultural vermin like rats, because squirrels have a hunting season, and so in some places it's illegal to kill them or trap them, unless you're licensed. But I don't think I don't think there's any place that it's illegal to trap rats. So let's say you know that there's rats eating your vegetables. Well, you can take rat traps and bait them with something that all rodents like to eat, like peanut butter. And you can set those out, and you can actually take those with larger rats. Um, you might have to take that trap and screw it to a board to keep it solidly anchored so it doesn't fly around. And then you can just set out some rat traps and bait them. And if you know where the rats are coming from, so sometimes rats will climb trees, or they'll come through holes or whatever. So if you take 3 or 4 traps and you set it right where you know rats are coming from, then you'll increase your odds of catching a rat.
Catching the rats. Got
Right.
it. All right. Tips and tricks for transplanting existing mulberries, volunteer mulberries, where I want them.
Always dig wild trees, or if you can, any trees, shrubs, anything like that during the winter. It's like performing surgery. If a doctor's going to be cutting you open and slicing you up, you don't want to be awake for it because it's more traumatic. Um, and similarly with plants, it's more traumatic to be dug up in the summer versus the winter. So wait until the winter, dig them up, try and go like 2 or 3 times as wide as you think they need to be dug so you can get as many feeder roots as possible. And then keep the roots moist. If you let the roots die out, the tree will die. They are vascular organisms and they have to stay moist or they die.
Yep, important. Are you going to be at SRF?
Yes, I will. I'll be teaching on rabbits.
Rabbits at Self Reliance Festival. Food Forest here. He's going to be up in Tennessee twice. Hopefully, he can fill up his dancing card with any consulting gigs he wants around then too. So.
I am pretty much full
Full.
up
He's over his
until
head drowning,
November.
going, "Help me!"
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is a very busy month for me. And I mean, I don't even have time slots available for distance consulting where it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours on the phone until the end of November.
Yep. Welcome to Everybody Wants to Grow Their Food Time. And we are all helping you as fast as we can. All right. Well, Nick, thanks for making the time to be on now. I will see you in a few weeks, and I'll see you again in October. And anything you want to say about how people can get in touch with you before we sign off?
Yeah, if you want to send me an email to get put on my waiting list, you can send an email to nick@homegrownliberty.com with the word consulting in the subject line. And just kind of as a shout out, there is a store in Czech, Virginia, Seven Springs Farm, that has some some soil amendments that I'm looking to get my hands on. It's expensive to ship 50-pound sacks of rock phosphate. It's not so expensive. If someone is driving through Virginia on their way to SRF or to Nicole's, send me an email and I will trade consulting or soil test analysis, soil prescriptions for transport of some of my soil amendments. So shoot me an email.
Awesome. Tori, those might not be flowering because of your climate. I wonder. Anyway, she's got a sun choke issue and she's in a colder place. Okay, well, great. Thanks for being on, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Nicole.